Hi, my name is Eefje. I studied songwriting and sound engineering at the Rock Academy, and today I am creating a video workshop about something that pretty much all artists run into eventually. One way or another, when you start writing music, you will have to deal with your inner critic. Your inner critic is the voice in your head that tells you that your idea sucks, that your lyrics are cliche, that your melody is boring, and that the chord progression you picked has been done a million times before. And anyway, you're a shitty guitar player, so why are you even trying this in the first place? And that's pretty rough, but I've never met anyone who hasn't heard this voice. Luckily, there's plenty of tricks and exercises to make dealing with your inner critic a little bit easier. In this video, you will see a few of those tips and exercises, as well as some clips from other people talking about creative flow and their inner critic. Some of these exercises might work better for you than others. I think what's important is you try out the ones that interest you the most and see what works best for you. There are lots of different theories on creativity and how it works. A lot of these theories talk about two different mindsets, the open mode or a creative flow and a closed mode. In our daily lives, we tend to stick to closed mode because it saves us energy and because simple tasks don't need creative thinking. But because we've become so used to operating in closed mode, it can get very difficult to break out of this and reach a creative flow. John Cleese gave a really interesting speech on creativity and what he does to reach this creative flow. I'll add in a few minutes of his speech here and a link in the description if you want to see the whole thing.
Limited helped you at this point of your lives. However, there is one negative thing that I can say. And it's negative because it's easier to say what creativity isn't. A bit like the sculptor who, when asked how he had sculpted a very fine elephant, explained that he'd taken a big block of marble and then knocked away all the bits that didn't look like an elephant. Now, here's the negative thing. Creativity is not a talent. It is not a talent. It is a way of operating. You see, when I say a way of operating, what I mean is this. Creativity is not an ability that you either have or do not have. It is, for example, and this may surprise you, absolutely unrelated to IQ. McKinnon showed that those regarded by their peers as most creative were in no way whatsoever different in IQ from their less creative colleagues. So in what way were they different? Well, McKinnon showed that the most creative had simply acquired a facility for getting themselves into a particular mood, a way of operating, which allowed their natural creativity to function. And we become fascinated by the fact that we can usefully describe the way in which people function at work in terms of two modes, open and closed. So what I can just add now is that creativity is not possible in the closed mode. Let me explain a little more. By the closed mode, I mean the mode that we are in most of the time when we're at work. We have inside us a feeling that there's lots to be done, and we have to get on with it if we're going to get through it all. It's an active, probably slightly anxious mode, although the anxiety can be exciting and pleasurable. It's a mode in which we're probably a little impatient, if only with ourselves. It has a little tension in it, not much humor. It's a mode in which we're very purposeful, and it's a mode in which we can get very stressed and even a bit manic, but not creative. By contrast, the open mode is a relaxed, expansive, less purposeful mode, in which we're probably more contemplative, more inclined to humor, which always accompanies a wider perspective, and consequently more playful. It's a mood in which curiosity for its own sake can operate. because we're not under pressure to get a specific thing done quickly. We can play, and that is what allows our natural creativity to surface. But here's the problem. We too often get stuck in the closed mode. Under the pressures which are all too familiar to us, we tend to maintain tunnel vision at times when we really need to step back and contemplate the wider view. There is just one other thing that I can say about creativity. There are certain conditions which do make it more likely that you'll get into the open mode and that something creative will occur. I can at least tell you how to get yourselves into the open mode. You need 5 things. 1, space. 2, time. 3, time. 4, confidence. And 5, humor. Okay, let's take space first. You can't become playful and therefore creative if you're under your usual pressures, because to cope with them, you've got to be in the closed mode, right? So you have to create some space for yourself away from those demands. And that means sealing yourself off. You must make a quiet space for yourself where you will be undisturbed. Next, time. It's not enough to create space. You have to create your space for a specific period of time. You have to know that your space will last until exactly, say, 3:30, and that at that moment your normal life will start again. Combining the first 2 factors, we create an oasis of quiet for ourselves by setting boundaries of space and of time. My work was more creative than his simply because I was prepared to stick with the problem longer. So imagine my excitement when I found that this was exactly what McKinnon found in his research. He discovered that the most creative professionals always played with the problem for much longer before they tried to resolve it, because they were prepared to tolerate that slight discomfort and anxiety that we all experience when we haven't solved a problem. The most creative people have learned to tolerate that discomfort for much longer. And so, just because they put in more pondering time, their solutions are more creative. So, to summarize, the third factor that facilitates creativity is time. Giving your mind as long as possible to come up with something original. Now, the next factor, number 4, is confidence. When you're in your space-time oasis, getting into the open mode, nothing will stop you being creative so effectively as the fear of making a mistake. The best way to get the confidence to do that is to know that while you're being creative, nothing is wrong. There's no such thing as a mistake, and any drivel may lead to the breakthrough. The last factor, the 5th, humor. Well, I happen to think the main evolutionary significance of humor is that it gets us from the closed mode to the open mode quicker than anything else. Humor is an essential part of spontaneity, an essential part of playfulness, an essential part of the creativity that we need to solve problems, no matter how serious they may be. So, when you set up a space-time oasis, giggle all you want. And there, ladies and gentlemen, are the 5 factors which you can arrange to make your lives more creative.
So I think this framework that John Cleese talks about is a very good starting point for looking at your own creative process and figuring out where you can make the most improvements. Now that we've got preparation and mindset out of the way, let's really get into this inner critic. I've collected a few exercises that work really well if you want to deal with your inner critic. The point of these exercises is to delay criticism. You're supposed to write as much as possible and not write something that's perfect in one go. When I first started doing these exercises, I thought they were kind of pointless. I saw my inner critic as like a quality control that made sure that whatever I wrote was good enough for other people to see. And here I was writing stuff that just didn't reach that level of quality at all. But what I didn't realize at the time is that it's much easier to have something to work with that you can improve than to have nothing at all. The first exercise is called Mind Map Association. For this exercise, you can use your phone or laptop, but I prefer to use paper because instead of writing from top to bottom, it allows you to go crisscross on the page, which sort of aligns better with the kind of thinking that I do when I'm mind mapping. So we have the paper in front of us, and on that paper we will write one word in the center. This word can be anything. It can be something that you've been thinking about writing about for a while. It can also be just a random item you see in the room or that you're thinking of. Next, we set a timer. I recommend, if you're just starting with this exercise, to start at 1 minute, and as you progress, to extend the timer to longer. So once the timer starts, we will try to write down as many words as possible on this paper before the minute is up. What's important in this exercise is that any word is a good word. Even if it's kind of hard for you to explain how you came from one word to the next word, it's fine. The idea behind this exercise is that you actively turn off your inner critic. Because we agreed that any word is a good word and we should write it down, your inner critic cannot reject any of the ideas you have. Obviously, it still might happen. There are times where you're just staring at the page and you can't think of any word that's happening in your head. And that's okay, because it's harder than it looks to ignore that voice in your head all the time. But doing this exercise regularly will make it much easier in the long run to ignore that voice when you're writing. The next exercise is a grounding exercise. This type of technique actually has its roots in psychology, as it's often used to help people who struggle with anxiety and panic attacks. This specific exercise is called the 5-4-3-2-1 technique. There are two ways to do this exercise. You can use the room you're currently in as the subject, or you can imagine yourself in a different situation and describe that situation with this exercise. For the explanation of this exercise, I'll just use the room. As the name suggests, the 5-4-3-2-1 technique has 5 steps. The first step is to look around the room and write down 5 things you can see. Try and really describe the things that you see by dedicating a sentence to each item. The second step is to focus on 4 things you can feel. This can be anything from the sun on your skin, the wind blowing through your hair, the fabric of the couch you're sitting on, the weight of your phone in your hands. The third step is to name 3 things you can hear around you. The fourth step is to notice 2 things you can smell. And the last step is focus on the 1 thing you can taste. By the end of this exercise, you'll have a page full of sensory descriptions which you can use for your writing later on. The way that it works for people with anxiety is that it gets you out of your mind and instead focusing on your senses to pick up information. Whenever you hit a writer's block, this exercise could be a really good one to try because we tend to forget to use our senses when we're writing. This comes back in the third exercise as well, which is called object writing. This is a timed exercise again, and usually done first thing in the morning. Pick a subject and try to use your senses to keep writing for 5 or 10 minutes, and use your senses to propel you forward every time you get stuck. What's really important about these exercises is that you learn to access your unfiltered stream of consciousness. This is a place of inspiration and ideas where your inner critic hasn't had a say yet. The more you do these exercises, the easier it will be to access that creative flow that everyone's looking for. Now, before we get to the last exercise, I have one more thing to say, which is that sometimes you just don't manage to write anything. There are days where you're just so stuck in a writer's block that really nothing's coming out. And I think the worst thing you can do at that moment is to get upset, because it will not motivate you to try again another day. In this case, I think we're better off just accepting that today things are not going to happen and try again later. And finally, writing is a muscle. The more you practice, the easier it gets. Now, this last exercise will probably sound pretty silly, because what we're going to try and do is to write the worst song ever. Think about things you really hate about songs, like when they keep using the same 4 chords throughout the entire song without changing anything, or when they rhyme bad with glad and sad, or when they use really difficult words that no one will understand, or when they're trying to be really descriptive but it's so much that you don't even know what you're looking at anymore. Now we're going to try and write a song just like that. For this exercise, it's again recommended to set a timer, otherwise you might be tempted to turn the bad song into a good song, and that's not the point of the exercise. I usually start with timers of 30 minutes, but you can stretch them up to 2 hours. I don't think you should do it longer than 2 hours though, because your creative energy will probably taper off at that point. The way we would do this exercise is either we would come up with a specific thing that we hate about a song and try to replicate that, or we would do one of the previous exercises to use as an inspiration pool. The rest of this exercise really is based on the way you like to write songs. If you don't have an established routine yet, I would say just write 4 lines and turn that into a verse or a chorus, and keep writing next sections until you feel like you have a song that's about 2 minutes long. Throughout this exercise, make sure to remind yourself that we are trying to write a bad song. So anything your inner critic says is actually helping you. This exercise helps you write songs easier and faster because you're not constantly slowed down by the criticism from your inner critic. Every once in a while, you will set out to write a bad song only to move into a creative flow and end up writing a good song accidentally. Or you will write a bad song with 2 really cool lines, or an interesting chord progression, or an interesting message or story that you can reuse when you want to actually make a good song. A lot of bad songs are the starting point for great ones. So that's everything that I had to tell you today. I hope you like these exercises and that you try them out sometime, and I wish you good luck writing bad songs.